Shabbat Shalom. So, what happened in 1967? Sorry, Jeff?
I graduated high school.
Jeff graduated high school, Sam Mintabu. Mazel tov. I assume that's what you were fishing for, Jeff, but no, that's fine. What else happened in 1967? The 6-Day War. What happened at the... Sorry? Jerusalem was reunited. Liberated, I have also heard the phrase used. Depends on who is telling it. What happened in 1967? What happened in the 6-Day War? What happened? Israel got all this territory. Okay, what happened? All the countries around Israel attacked. And they survived, they survived a massive war. This was not the Yom Kippur War, the famed one, that was 73. But a similar conflagration of war with all of these surrounding neighbors. One could, let's not say all the countries attacked. Well, the first act of war, I believe technically, was Nasser nationalizing the Straits of Tiran. The first shots were in fact fired by Israel in that massive airstrike of Operation Moked, destroying the air forces of all the surrounding countries on the ground. What's the significance of 67?
Nothing has changed.
Carol, with quite the take on the matter, I said, what's the significance of 67? And Carol said, nothing has changed. Does anybody want to offer a different possible significance of 1967?
Change the borders.
What, sorry?
Change the borders.
Change the borders. All right, the borders are different. Yeah, Scott.
We're going to have Judea and Samaria in total.
Okay.
And part of the Bashan. And we go on.
The state of Israel holds the territory that some would refer to as Judea and Samaria, depending on one's narrative around the entire enterprise. The state of Israel now holds Judea and Samaria.
Differently, as the war when the occupation began.
Put differently, thank you, Alan, this is the war that began what one could also characterize as this occupation, the Israeli military administration, depending on areas A, B, and C, and who you count as administering it under what terms and whatnot. It is an immensely complicated thing in point of fact, but you would not be incorrect to say either it was the conquering and unification of Judea and Samaria, and it is also the occupation of everything beyond the Green Line that a lot of people point to as a genesis of some of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that this generation has inherited. Both are factually correct.
People were able to go back and pray at the wall.
What's that?
People were able to go back and pray at the wall.
People were able to go back and pray at the wall. Osnat is really honing in on Jerusalem here and some of the effects within Jerusalem itself.
We're able to go with Hezron to have they kept the where Abraham was buried and Isaac and
Machpelah.
That was open again, and we're able to go in instead of going to the seventh step.
Okay, Machpelah, the cave around Hebron, was reopened to Jewish worship in a different way. If you hear Scott talking here, Scott, I'm going to use you. Thank you. You're hearing a lot of the context around which we understand 67 framed within biblical consciousness, framed within the consciousness of Torah, the names of the lands, Machpelah, some of these different things. These are very much framed as with a Torah sort of consciousness that's defining and interpreting and labeling these things. Alan's piece about occupation, and I fed to it the Green Line as well, and I'm not accusing either of you of holding one view or another, anything of that nature.
I
saw that, yeah.
My air quotes are very prominent.
I saw that. So this question around interpreting 67 through the lens of Green Line, and he used the word occupation as well, with, as he stipulated, air quotes, that to interpret that set of events of 1967 in that way is to interpret them through a contemporary political lens, a certain kind of statecraft, a certain kind of diplomacy, a certain kind of current events that is not incorrect or untrue, just like the biblical memory of all of this stuff is not untrue either. But these are two really different ways of thinking about what happened in 67. I'll add a couple more just for funsies. 67, one could make the argument, was the last time that any foreign adversary or military was able to challenge Israel's existence through conventional force of arms. Yom Kippur was an ugly and near-run thing, but there's the whole historicity of, well, Israel thought that its northern command might collapse and its entire defense command might collapse. None of the attacking armies thought they were capable of doing that. They thought they were just striking a blow from their own internal communications of the general staffs of Syria and Egypt. And so 67, on some level, winds up being the last sort of mortal danger through conventional military means. And I am leaving room for unconventional being some kind of, I don't know, unconventional weapon, like nuclear, chemical weapons, what have you. That seems to be an open question. But you could look at it as the last time Israel fought that kind of war. Israelis, I think, would fairly argue to you that 73 was probably the last time they fought that kind of war. Like I said, you can quibble this one back and forth. I'm not going to call balls and strikes on which is correct, but you could make that as an argument, okay? You could make an argument, as Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook does. Tzvi Yehuda Kook is not Rav Kook, the famous Rav Kook, okay? This is his son. Tzvi Yehuda Kook makes the argument that 67 is a companion piece essentially to the Shoah, which marks the end of a chunk of time in and around the Shoah in which European Jewry was destroyed, and 67 is the end of that same ascent trajectory toward a new endeavor in and around the land of Israel that should culminate with Biat HaMashiach, the coming of the Messiah. Okay? I mention that because it's not totally what Scott was talking about. Scott was talking about a certain kind of memory and a certain kind of perspective. Tzvi Yehuda Kook is talking about something that comes. Tzvi Yehuda Kook is talking about it and the Shoah are companion experiences which are supposed to trigger something bigger, broader, grander, theological, whatever. I don't think most military analysts or diplomats thought about 67 in messianic terms. I don't believe most Israelis think about it in messianic terms. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a pretty minority kind of perspective even within Israel. And Eikev is an interesting commentary on this whole thing. Looking at chapter 9. Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, you're about to cross the Jordan to go in and dispossess nations greater and more populous than you. Great cities with walls sky high, a people great and tall, the Bnei Anak, these Anakites, of whom you have knowledge, for whom you have heard it said, who can stand up to the Bnei Anak? So you're going to go into the land, and there's going to be a war, and you're going to be fighting with Bnei Anak, the Anakites. What is Anak? Somebody want to translate that?
Somebody with you.
A giant.
Giant.
Yeah, that's right. In a more contemporary Hebrew idiom, it's interesting to me that the JPS commentary does not translate Anak and leaves it as like almost a tribe of sorts. But Anak, you could say the children of giants. It's a bunch of giants wandering around. And there's this other, if you look at some of the medieval exegesis around it, the Mefarshim look at it that these Anakim are the children of Nephilim from Bereshit, of this union between humans and God that predates the flood, a whole bunch of far-out esoteric stuff, but that these are somehow these legendary gigantic warriors of Tmol Shilshom, of way back when.
Which we mentioned also in Shlachlecha, in the 5.
Which are also mentioned in the episode of the Meraglim, of the spies who are supposed to scout out or go and do their tourism of the land, and they find the giants. Now, who can stand up to the children of Anak, B'nai Anak? Who can do that? Well, one could say that Joshua's shock force that he's going to lead across into Canaan to hold the land, Joshua, he's the guy who can do it. But that would be a misunderstanding, because it says in verse 3 of chapter 9, "Know then that this day none other than the Lord thy God is crossing at your head, a devouring fire. It is God who will wipe them out. God will subdue them before you, that you may quickly dispossess and destroy them as God promised you. And when God, your God, has thrust them from your path, say not to yourselves, the Lord has enabled us to possess this land because of our virtues. It is rather because of the wickedness of those nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you. It's not because of your virtues and your rectitude that you will be able to possess their country. It's because of the wickedness that the Lord your God is dispossessing those nations before you in order to fulfill the oath that the Lord made to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Know then that it is not for any virtue of yours that the Lord thy God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. Remember, never forget how you provoked the Lord thy God to anger in the wilderness. From the place you left the land of Egypt until you reached this place, you have continued defiant toward the Lord." I mention all of that because that basically feels like it's a long soliloquy saying, y'all are going to go to war with and win against giants, but don't get it twisted. It's not because of your own superiority, because you're better human beings and more wonderful and more blessed and whatever. Like, y'all are a little bit problematic too, if we're just being honest with ourselves here, around that whole wandering in the generation piece. This is not about a matter of understanding one's virtue as a result of the results. The proof is not in the pudding, so to speak. The military victory does not, it's interesting, confer a greater sense of some kind of virtuousness. You have to win the fight, but you have to prove your virtue based on its own merit. You have to prove your virtue based on the way that you behave and the way that you live and the way that you lead and what it is you do with that. Winning itself doesn't mean that one gets a certain kind of referendum and a blank check to do whatever one wants. Winning also doesn't necessarily mean that God has bought into all of your mishigas. See under here, where God is saying, no, you are still the stiff-necked people who have screwed up all the stuff that you have in the desert along the way. I haven't forgotten that stuff and the gnarly twists and turns along the way. But what was happening there was problematic, and don't forget that God was involved with it. I mentioned 67 against the backdrop of all of this, not because I want to tell you how you should interpret 1967, what you should even call it in point of fact. There are a lot of different terms in a lot of different languages for exactly what unfolds and transpires there. But I think it does behoove us to read that word of caution that comes with it. You're gonna defeat, you're gonna shmeiss b'nai Anak. It's gonna work out. don't draw the wrong conclusion from it. Victory here doesn't erase the stuff that actually went sideways in the wandering in the desert. We are still a stiff-necked people. We are, it's true. You know, that's the joke about the two Jews who have the 3 synagogues. You know the joke I'm talking about? They each have a synagogue, and then there's the synagogue that neither of them will set foot in. That's why for 2 Jews there are 3 synagogues. That feels, I see all of you nodding and smiling. It doesn't feel like I'm saying to you something that is untrue. I think that joke is a way of sort of acknowledging that like, it's hard, and we get it wrong sometimes, and it is not perfect, and it is incumbent upon us to figure out from the ways in which we get it sideways how to do better and how to lift it up. But that in the case of the B'nai Anak, winning the thing does not give one carte blanche. It's not a mandate to just do whatever one wants, whatever one says, however one feels or whatever. It takes real discretion. And it takes really turning and returning to one's own virtues. One doesn't confer the other. Might does not make right. The proof is not in the pudding. But the proof is sort of how we live our lives, day in and day out, whether or not it is that we win. Shabbat Shalom.